Swedish Rumble Show. Hi everyone and welcome to today's episode. Chelsea just signed Caicedo for £150 million, bringing their transfer spending to almost £1 billion just the last 12 months. Does FFP not apply to Chelsea? Or will they be saved by Bowley's massive sales efforts, unloading players to the Saudi League? When Bowley started his unlimited spending spree in January, we, the financial experts, focused on if the club would get punished this summer, get a transfer ban. But the conclusion was that Chelsea just might make it, especially with some creative accounting. At that point, the accounts for the 21-22 season had not yet been published. When they were announced earlier this summer, they were much worse than expected. But soon thereafter, Bowley went to a trip to Saudi Arabia, during which he managed to sell 3 players. Ziyech's transfer was later cancelled. The general impression has hence been that Chelsea probably would be fine after all. But we have a real scoop on tonight's show, because after crunching numbers the last 2 days, we can reveal that a record breach of the Premier League FFP provisions will be committed by Chelsea. How, when, why and what will it mean? We will cover it all. Thereafter we will look at PSG, who also have struggled mightily with FFP. What must they do before the deadline? And we will also take a look at Real Madrid. If they sign Kylian Mbappe, what must they do? Will that mean that they must sell Tchouaméni to the Premier League, as rumoured? Let's dive into it. So what have Chelsea done? Why are they in trouble? After Bowley came in, he took over a full top 4 Premier League squad, built to challenge for the title, and then he signed 14 more new players for £611 million. Why did he sign so many new players? We will come back to that. Since the players were signed to long-term deals and the transfer fees are amortized, in other words counted as a cost, yearly over the full term of the contract, these players weren't as costly as one might imagine, at least not short term. But the cost will of course hit the books down the road instead. What is the point with this? We'll come back to that too. So what have happened this summer? Bowley has kept spending, signing 7 new players for over 300 million, close to £1 billion in total since he came in last season. Meanwhile, Chelsea had a catastrophic season on the pitch, missing out on all UEFA tournaments. So could anything save Chelsea? The fate was put in player sales. Nobody in the world does a better job at selling players than Chelsea. And this summer, they didn't only manage to offload players surplus to requirement. They sold the player of the season for Chelsea in 3 of the last 4 seasons, in Mason Mount. They sold record signing Kai Havertz to its rival Arsenal. They sold Kovacic to City. But was that enough? So what rules must Chelsea comply with? Since they don't compete in Europe, they will only be monitored by the Premier League. They will not have to comply with the UEFA football earnings rule, starting to apply the first time next summer, nor the squad cost rule either, for that matter. But they have to comply with the Premier League's financial sustainability requirements. When is this rule applied? It's done once per year, before a season starts, so the next time we will be in the spring-summer of 2024. What will the Premier League look at then? They will look at Chelsea's earnings the last 3 years. The total loss during these 3 seasons may not be higher than £105 million. We can see that Chelsea recorded a £93 million loss in 21-22, and our estimates have the club making a £133 million loss during the 22-23 season. Hence, to reach the £105 million threshold, this means that Chelsea must make a £121 million profit this season. So what does our forecast tell us? Looking at the players sold so far by Chelsea, we can see that they have made a massive profit on player sales. The profit on the trading with the players' rights alone is 83 million. In addition, they have saved 75 million on wages and 57 million in amortization. So in total, They have improved their result this current season with a staggering £216 million. And this does not even include expected sales of Lukaku, Ziyech, Hudson-Odoi and Chalobah, and perhaps even Kepa. These transfers could clear another 50 to 75 million for Chelsea. So where does that put them? Over to our forecast. Remember that we came to the conclusion that Chelsea must record a 115 million profit next season. Our forecast have them recording a 104 million loss instead. Forecasts are never easy. We make a lot of assumptions. In addition, Chelsea can claim to have lost money due to unforeseen events linked to Abramovich getting sanctioned. But even if we account for that, even if they do extremely well with player sales, perhaps even selling someone like Gallagher, Bowley strikes great new commercial deals, Chelsea would still be way off according to our forecast. So what will happen if Chelsea breach the Premier League's FFP rules? That is not an easy question, since no team before have been sanctioned for breaching these rules. Everton and City are under investigation for it. In summary, Chelsea can be ordered to pay a fine, be given a transfer ban, or suffer a point deduction. What is likely? Is it just pure guesswork at this point? Look, the experts appointed to settle the case has great discretion, but there is an established pattern to decide on the sanction in situations like this. You look at the rule in question and what the intent is with that rule. What is at stake? Which sanctions the persons having written the rules have made available, and what the purpose might be with that. The profit and sustainability rule is deemed to be of importance, otherwise it wouldn't exist. In combination with that, it also has a direct effect on how competitive teams are. So for teams to respect this rule, they must be certain that their rivals also respect it. Otherwise they would fall behind in the table. And breaching it would become more or less the cost of doing business. Teams should not violate it by any significant margin. That is what the Premier League must make sure by sanctioning teams that breach it. All in all, this certainly points toward a 10-15 point deduction for Chelsea from my point of view. The breach is significant. Chelsea knew when making signings this summer what the situation would be next summer. On the other hand, the rules stipulate point deductions in two other situations. If you join a Super League or something like that, you will get a 30-point deduction. And if a club becomes insolvent, you get a 9 points deduction. Especially this 9 points deduction for a team that has become insolvent might indicate that it should not only take breaching the FFP rules by a significant margin, but that it also takes that a club must endanger its financial situation and status to get a point deduction. Perhaps a fine plus a transfer ban is a safer bet, but I don't know. Chelsea has a long history of breaches, and this seems to have been premeditated, and it will be made by a significant margin. But won't this take months, if not years, before we get a decision from the Premier League on a sanction for Chelsea? There is nowadays a clear intent that a point deduction shall be made so that it takes effect before the next season starts. So in Chelsea, if a Chelsea breach is established next summer, the intent is that a decision on a sanction shall have been made before the 24-25 season starts, so that it will impact which teams plays in Europe, prize money from the Premier League and so forth. Before we leave Chelsea, remember that we raised two questions earlier that we promised to get back to. Why the long contracts? The contracts also have low wages up front, which indicate that they are very profitable on the back end. Why sell experienced players now to buy younger players? Bowley will have an investment horizon. I think it's fair to assume that it will be approximately 10 years in Chelsea. I think we almost could mark that date in the calendar, 2032, or around that, will probably be the time he exits this investment. The idea is to make a profit when selling the club, of course, at that point. But by investing early and heavily in the club and initiating the building of a new arena, the hope is to put the club at the top of football in Europe soon, and in a way that the club is seen as a very safe investment the coming 3 to 5 years. That way Clearlake, Bowley's company, can recuperate much of the initial 2.5 billion investment by selling off minority stakes up to 50% in the somewhat near future. And then they will have what they receive in 2032 when the entire club is sold to be mostly profit. So, over to the next topic. Let's start with Real Madrid. We won't make any fuss about it. Real Madrid's profit and loss is ridiculously stable, as we can see in this simplified forecast. There have been a lot of talk about Real Madrid being forced to sell players to afford Kylian Mbappe. Mbappe made a massive 1.4 million euros per week for PSG and would be extremely expensive. But due to their financial stability, Real would not have to sell players to afford Mbappe. But with that said, their consistent earnings show something else. They run a very tight ship and keep spending balanced against their income. So I think they would sell a player or two if they sign Mbappe. But they wouldn't be doing it with their backs against the wall. Lastly, how about PSG? It's changing by the minute. Is Neymar off to the Saudi League? Is Mbappe all of a sudden re-signing with PSG? PSG announced a record 360 million loss and was given a 60 million euro fine by UEFA last summer. Is selling Neymar and letting Messi go enough? Or do they have to turn to the likes of Hakimi? And what about the reports in Le Parisien of how PSG only will be affected by the UEFA fine and the FFP provisions in 2026? PSG is an extremely interesting case to study from my point of view. Here is our forecast for PSG. We have a 365 million loss in 22 and a projected 172 million loss for last season. And we estimate that letting Messi go and selling Neymar will improve that to a 114 million loss next summer. So let's look back at UEFA's football earnings rule. Surely PSG would be in a major breach of FFP again next summer. The UEFA will next summer review if teams fulfill the requirements to play in Europe. Since it's the first time the football earnings rule is applied, they would only look at 2 seasons. From 24, it's 3 seasons, just like the Premier League. The aggregate football loss may not exceed 60 million euros, and right now it seems like PSG will come in with a total loss of 226 million. But let's go back to last summer and look at what happened. And if you understand this mechanism, I would say that you understand FFP better than 99% of the experts out there, and you will also be able to evaluate what, for example, happened in the transfer market and what will happen in the future a lot better. A team that breaches FFP can, and so far always opts to, enter into a settlement agreement with UEFA. A summary of these agreements are published by UEFA. Let's look at the core parts of the settlement agreement. It covers the 4 subsequent seasons, up until the 25-26 season. And the primary purpose is to ensure that the club in breach of the rules get back on track by the end of the 25-26 season. In addition, the settlement agreement includes intermediary financial steps. So you can't just breach the FFP and say 2022, promise to fix it 4 years later by 2026, and then do nothing for 4 years. So this sounds soft. Wasn't these rules supposed to have teeth? PSG will be allowed to have a big loss in 24 as long as it's better than in 23. And it's not before 25 they must show an improved result, and they must only make a profit in 2026? Both yes and no. The way the settlement agreement is written, it's obvious that PSG must have this upward trajectory. There is no way UEFA can let a team that does not follow it compete in the Champions League as we get a couple of years into the settlement agreement. If PSG doesn't follow this trajectory, they will get fined and sanctioned on a 6-month basis. And even if sanction 2 or 3 isn't that tough, being thrown out of the UEFA tournaments does not come that far down the list of sanctions. On the flip side, as we clearly can see, at the bottom line, this breach enables PSG to spend a heck of a lot more in total than if they had been best in class and followed these rules during this time. And the worse the initial loss is, the more you can spend. Is this a tactic used? Definitely. PSG 100% knew they were going to breach FFP when they signed Messi, Mbappe and Neymar. PSG in fact did the same thing back in 2014 when they also were found to breach the FFP rules. On the other hand, while this might seem to be attractive for some to be able to spend a lot more, we that have followed football for a long while knows that the game can be very unpredictable. A position of strength at one point can turn into a big weakness overnight. With this strategy, and that's what it should be called, it's a strategy, you have very little flexibility over a 3-year period. So where is PSG in all of this summer? We don't know the exact intermediary targets for PSG. I also cannot obtain the same insight into their financials as with English clubs. But just letting Messi and Sergio Ramos go, which they have done so far, has a big positive effect on their financials. If they can sell Neymar, it helps them even more. My conclusion is that PSG gladly will look to save a buck if they can. And if someone comes in with an offer for a Verratti, for example, they would surely keenly look into it. But given that they had so much low-hanging fruit to make savings in letting Messi go and not re-signing Sergio Ramos and so forth, they don't quite have their backs against the wall. An absurd loss for them is still a step in the right direction. Lastly, to paint a complete picture, it's in relation to the above phenomena that the UEFA rulebook will become more complete as the new squad cost rule comes into effect the coming years. When it has entered into effect in full, it sets out that teams only may spend 70% of their earnings on wages and amortization. So yes, in a way, it's very similar to the current Premier League and UEFA FFP rules. It's also based on earnings and costs. But the way it separates itself is how it's sanctioned. It will result in automatic fines in accordance with this table. So it will make breaching the FFP rules as a strategy like PSG have done a lot more costly. And these fines impacts FFP just in the same way as any other expense. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please don't forget to smash a like and subscribe. We got a lot more exciting stuff coming up and also more downright scoops. In the next episode, we will, besides current events, look at Barca and Juventus.